All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we are diving headfirst into the world of Kurdish oil exports.
Sounds messy.
Oh, it is. It's a real tangled web. We're talking about a region, Iraqi Kurdistan, sitting on a massive amount of oil,
Huge reserves. Yeah.
but actually getting that oil out and onto the global market, that's been, well, let's just say it's been a bit of a geopolitical obstacle course for years now.
Yeah, and things got really interesting back in 2023, I remember. An international court basically said, nope, Baghdad gets to call the shots on all Iraqi oil
Oh,
exports.
right. That threw a huge wrench into
Big
things.
time. And that included the oil coming out of Kurdistan, which meant the
Wow.
pipeline got shut down, exports ground to a halt, and the KRG, their budget just took a nosedive.
I mean, billions of dollars in lost revenue. We saw
Mhm.
reports of unpaid invoices stacking up, even trouble paying government salaries. I remember that.
Oh, yeah, it was a full-blown crisis.
So, okay, now fast forward to today, February 2025. What's the situation on the ground? We've been poring over financial reports, digging into Kurdish news sources, even sneaking a peek at a London Stock Exchange forum or two.
Oh,
And
juicy.
let me tell you, things are starting to get interesting.
The big news, the thing that's got everyone buzzing, is that the Iraqi parliament just passed these budget amendments that could potentially get those pipelines flowing again.
Oh, okay, so a potential breakthrough, but you know there's a but coming.
Oh, yeah, there's always a but.
Okay.
And this one's a doozy. The catch is that all Kurdish oil exports, all of it, has to go through Iraq's national oil company, SOMO. No more independent deals for the KRG.
Wait, so hold on. Is this basically the KRG waving the white flag? Have they completely caved to Baghdad?
It's a little more nuanced than that. Think of it more like maybe a strategic retreat. They're giving up some control. Yeah, SOMO's calling the shots now. But in exchange, the KRG has this guaranteed cut of the oil revenue. They're trying to, stabilize things after all the chaos. Imagine trying to run a government, pay your employees, fund basic services, without even knowing how much money you'll have coming in each month. That's what they've been dealing with.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But this whole thing with Somo taking over, what happens to all those contracts the KRG already has with these international oil
I
companies,
don't know.
the ones that are already operating in Kurdistan? Those companies have got to be sweating bullets right now.
Oh, absolutely. They've invested billions, and now suddenly the rules of the game have changed. Talk about a curveball. It'll be interesting to see how they renegotiate those contracts, and frankly, whether these companies trust this new system enough to even stick around.
Speaking of trust, and I don't know if you've picked up on this, but there's a lot of conflicting info floating around about exactly how much the KRG is going to get paid for their oil.
Ah, yeah, the price per barrel. It's the big question, isn't it? We saw some chatter on that London Stock Exchange forum mentioning like 16 bucks a barrel, but then other sources are saying the KRG initially wanted 26.
Whoa, that's a huge difference. So, like, who gets to decide what a fair price is in this whole mess?
Well, from what we've gathered, they're bringing in an independent consultant, someone to look at all the production costs, transportation costs, which, by the way, are way higher in Kurdistan than in southern Iraq.
Oh, right, the geography up there is tough.
Exactly. So all that gets factored in, but you can bet there's going to be some serious negotiations, some serious arm wrestling going on behind the scenes.
And this is where things get really interesting, right? Because this little detail, the price per barrel, it reveals so much about the power dynamics at play. It's not just about getting the oil out of the ground and getting paid. It's about who has the leverage, who gets to call the shots, who ultimately benefits.
Oh, yeah, it's a power play for sure. And, even if they do manage to agree on a price everyone can stomach, there's another wrinkle. Actually, getting this whole new system with SOMO running the show, getting everything up and running, well, that could take months. It's not going to happen overnight.
Right. And one of the financial analysis pieces we were looking at, it highlighted this exact issue. Contracts need to be reworked. Payment systems need to be set up. It's a logistical nightmare, especially with so many different players involved. You've got SOMO in Baghdad, the KRG in Erbil, and then all these international oil companies.
Put yourself in the shoes of one of those oil execs for a second. You've been sitting on unpaid invoices for who knows how long. You're watching this whole political drama unfold, and now someone's telling you to just trust this brand new system that hasn't even been tested yet.
Yeah, I'd be popping antacids like candy.
No kidding. But then again, the potential payoff is huge. I mean, we're talking billions of barrels of oil here. These companies know that.
So it's a gamble, a high-stakes gamble. Do they stick around and hope for the best, or cut their losses and run?
Big decisions, lots of risk, lots of uncertainty. It's going to be fascinating to watch how this all plays out.
And speaking of uncertainty, we came across this article in a Kurdish news outlet. It mentioned that the KRG's Minister of Natural Resources is going to be the one heading up the whole export restart effort. But, let's be real. This isn't just about technical stuff, logistics. We're talking about Kurdish politics, and that's a whole other beast entirely.
Oh, yeah, and don't forget, those regional elections back in 2024, the two main Kurdish parties, the KDP and the PUK, they've been battling it out for power for decades. And guess what's at the heart of that battle?
Oil money.
Bingo.
So just to break it down for our listeners, the KDP, they're the ones in control of most of the oil-producing areas right now, and they're really pushing hard to get these exports going again.
Makes sense.
But the PUK, they're not just sitting back quietly. They've been accusing the KDP of corruption, of mismanaging the oil money for years.
So the KDP is stuck trying to keep Baghdad happy, get the oil flowing again, and fend off attacks from their own political rivals.
Talk about pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, you know me, I always like to save the juiciest tidbit for last. Remember all that talk about the official pipeline being shut down? Well, guess what? Turns out that didn't actually stop all the oil from flowing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we found this tweet from a Kurdish news outlet, Zoom News, and it had this video, and it was pretty wild. It showed hundreds of oil tankers supposedly smuggling Kurdish oil, get this, into Iran.
Whoa, Iran, with all the sanctions and everything, that's bold.
Right. Someone's making a killing off this whole illicit operation. But how is this even possible? Iran is under international sanctions.
Yeah, it's a murky world, that's for sure. Backroom deals, shadowy trucking routes, a whole lot of questions about who's turning a blind eye. But that video, it's pretty undeniable proof that it's happening, and on a huge scale, too.
And this is where I start to get a little, nervous. I mean, if the KRG is trying to get those official exports going again, trying to build trust with international companies, wouldn't this smuggling operation completely backfire?
That's the billion-dollar question. If this gets exposed, it could blow up everything. It makes the KRG look shady, unreliable, not to mention the whole violating international sanctions thing.
So what's the motivation then? Are they that desperate for cash? Or is there something else going on that we're not seeing? It's like a geopolitical puzzle box.
Absolutely. And it really highlights how much we tend to focus on governments and these big corporations. But there are all these other forces at play, often operating in the shadows. Things are rarely as straightforward as they seem.
Okay, so let's take a breath for a second and try to sum up what we've learned so far. These budget amendments, they could be a game changer, but there are a lot of ifs, ands, and buts.
Price disputes, logistical hurdles, and enough political intrigue to make your head spin, both within Kurdistan and in their relationship with Baghdad.
Oh, and of course, that whole oil smuggling into Iran thing.
Yeah.
Clearly, there are things happening behind the scenes that we're not fully grasping.
Exactly. And you know what? We can't talk about all of this without bringing Turkey into the picture. They control that crucial pipeline to the Mediterranean, remember? The Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline.
Right. So even if Baghdad and the KRG manage to, kiss and make up,
Yeah.
they still need Turkey on board. And their relationship with both the Kurds and the Iraqi government has been, let's just say it's been colorful.
To put it mildly. But you know what? I think we should save that whole Turkey saga for after a quick break. Stay with us.
Yeah, Turkey, they're a key player in all of this. We're talking about the Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline, the only way for Kurdish oil to actually reach those international markets. Well, I guess besides those creative trucking arrangements we were just talking about, right, those tanker convoys heading into Iran, definitely not your typical export route.
Yeah.
So even if Baghdad and the KRG, even if they manage to find some common ground, they still need Turkey to play ball. And if I'm remembering this right, Turkey's relationship with both the KRG and the Iraqi government, it's been a bit of a bumpy ride, hasn't it?
That's putting it lightly. Remember back in 2023, the same court that sided with Baghdad, they actually slapped Turkey with a massive fine.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
They were basically accused of buying Kurdish oil without asking Baghdad's permission, basically cutting them out of the deal completely.
Talk about a diplomatic slap in the face.
Yeah.
So knowing all that, knowing that there's all this baggage, do you think Turkey's going to be all that cooperative this time around? What's in it for them?
Well, Turkey's got its own energy it needs to think about, right? They import a lot of their oil and gas, so having a steady supply coming from Iraq, even if it's technically under Baghdad's control, that's got to be pretty appealing to them. It's a strategic win.
Plus, I bet they're seeing this whole situation as a chance to flex their geopolitical muscles a bit. If they play their cards right, they could strengthen their ties with both sides, the Iraqi government and the KRG. maybe even score some sweet trade deals or infrastructure projects down the line.
You're catching on quick. It's all about that delicate balance, right? They want to keep their influence in the region, make sure their energy needs are met. How they navigate this whole thing with Baghdad and the Kurds, it's going to be a fascinating game of chess to watch.
Okay, so we've got Baghdad trying to assert their authority, the KRG trying to, secure their financial future, Turkey playing their own strategic game. But we can't forget about the other elephants in the room, right? The international oil companies, the IOCs, they're the ones actually doing the drilling, getting the oil out of the ground. They're making this whole thing possible.
And they've been through the ringer. Seriously, think about it. They sign these big, lucrative contracts with the KRG, then bam, the pipeline gets shut down, invoices go unpaid, the whole region's in turmoil. I would not want to be in their boardrooms right now.
No kidding. Talk about stress. So if you're an exec at a company like DNO or Gulf Keystone Petroleum, what do you even do at this point? Do you trust this new agreement enough to double down on your investment? Or do you say, okay, that's enough, and move on to a less chaotic part of the world?
It's a tough one. On the one hand, the potential rewards are huge. Kurdistan's got tons of untapped oil, and if things settle down, these companies stand to make a fortune.
But on the other hand, they've been burned before, right? Trust is a big issue here. They need more than just promises. They need to know they're going to get paid. They need clear contracts. And honestly, they need the whole political situation to calm down, way down.
Absolutely. And remember, these companies, they're publicly traded, which means they've got shareholders to answer to. If their investment in Kurdistan starts to look too risky, they're going to face a ton of pressure to pull out.
It's a high-stakes poker game, billions of dollars on the line. Everyone's trying to figure out who to trust, what risks to take, and how to come out on top. And all of this is happening against this backdrop of global energy demand, climate change, constantly shifting geopolitical alliances.
It's a lot to keep track of. And the thing is, this whole situation, it's constantly in flux. What looks like a sure thing today could fall apart tomorrow. There are just too many players, too many competing interests, all fighting for control of this incredibly valuable resource.
Which brings me to a question for our listeners. Imagine just for a second that you're the one calling the shots on the KRG's oil strategy. What would be your top priorities? How would you navigate this incredibly complex web of competing interests and try to secure a stable future for Kurdistan's oil industry?
It's the question that probably keeps those KRG ministers up at night, right?
Okay.
Do you go for the short-term gains, even if it means making deals with, shall we say, less than savory partners like we saw with that Iranian smuggling operation?
Or do you play the long game? Focus on building trust with international companies, with governments, even if it means accepting less favorable terms in the short term. It's a classic dilemma, no easy answers.
And you know what's interesting? This whole situation in Kurdistan, it kind of reflects these bigger global trends we're seeing. This shift away from traditional energy sources like oil, this push for renewables.
So as a KRG, they're not only dealing with these immediate challenges like how to get their oil to market, but they also need to be thinking about the long game. What happens when the demand for oil starts to dry up? How do they diversify their economy? Prepare for a post-oil world?
Exactly. They've got to be thinking beyond this current crisis and come up with a long-term strategy, something that's going to benefit the Kurdish people for generations to come.
And that's the real challenge, isn't it? It's not just about profits or political power. It's about creating a sustainable future for an entire region.
Well said. And it just shows how interconnected all of these issues are, you know? The decisions that are made in those Kurdish oil fields, they're going to have ripple effects that go way beyond the region itself. Global energy markets, international relations, even the fight against climate change. It's all tied together.
So we've talked about the political maneuvering, the financial complexities, the roles of international companies and neighboring countries. But there's one piece of this puzzle we haven't fully explored yet. And it goes back to that video of those oil tankers crossing into Iran.
Right. The smuggling operation.
It's easy to get caught up in the world of governments and big corporations, but we can't forget about the people who are actually living this reality. We need to talk about the people on the ground in Iraqi Kurdistan. How is all of this affecting them? It's easy to get caught up in the big picture stuff, governments, oil companies, international courts. But what about the everyday people, the ones actually living in Iraqi Kurdistan? What does all this mean for them?
That's such a good point. And to be honest, it's one that often gets overlooked in all these discussions about global economics and geopolitics. But for a lot of people in Iraqi Kurdistan, the oil industry is their livelihood, their hope for a better future.
But it's also been a source of so much instability. I mean, we've seen it firsthand. When that pipeline got shut down, it wasn't just the government that felt the pain. Regular people lost their jobs, prices went through the roof, it became a real struggle just to make ends meet.
Exactly. And even now, with this possibility of exports restarting, there's this sense of, I don't know, cautious optimism, but also a lot of skepticism. They've been let down before. Deals have fallen apart. Promises haven't been kept. Their lives have been upended by forces beyond their control.
And let's not forget about the corruption. There have been all these allegations of mismanagement, people accusing the KRG of lining their own pockets while ignoring the needs of their people.
It's complicated, no doubt. But it really highlights the need for transparency, for accountability in how these resources are managed. The decisions about oil exports need to benefit all Kurds, not just a select few.
And this is where I think civil society, journalists, independent watchdogs, they have such a crucial role to play. They need to hold those in power accountable, make sure that the voices of the people are actually being heard, push for policies that genuinely put the well-being of the Kurdish people first.
It all circles back to our listeners, doesn't it? Because ultimately, it's informed engagement, critical thinking, being willing to challenge the status quo that can really make a difference.
So if you're listening to this right now, whether you're an investor, an energy expert, or just someone who cares about the future of this region, ask yourself, what role can you play? How can we ensure that the Kurdish people actually benefit from their resources?
How can we push for more transparency and accountability? How can we support the individuals and organizations that are working so hard to create a more just and equitable future for Kurdistan?
Those are the questions we all need to be asking. Because the future of Kurdistan, and honestly the future of our global energy system, it hinges on the choices that we make today.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And I think that about wraps up our deep dive into this incredibly complex world of Kurdish oil exports. It's been a fascinating journey, sometimes a little bit bewildering, through a landscape of negotiations, political maneuvering, and some seriously high-stakes decision-making.
We've covered a lot of ground, but I have a feeling this story is far from over. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on how things develop, and who knows, maybe we'll revisit this whole topic in a future deep dive. But until then, stay curious, my friends.